So far, whenever you enter the game view, the background that you see is this plain blue background. In case you're wondering where this comes from, if you come to your follow camera, have a look under the camera component, you'll see in background there is a color. If you change this color, then the background color will change. We don't want this to be a boring single color though, we want it to be something that has some depth. And one way that you can achieve depth is with a parallax effect. This means instead of one single background image, you're using multiple background images. And each image moves at a different speed to simulate how you might see those objects in the real world. For example, when you're driving and you look out the car window, the trees that are close to you are passing by really quickly, the trees that are further away pass by a lot more slowly, and then the mountains, sometimes it looks like they're barely even moving at all. This is what we want to try and achieve with the parallax effect. Okay, so if you have a look under our artwork folder, desert theme, backgrounds, you can see that there's 3 objects here that we can use for a parallax effect. One faraway mountain, some closer hills, and some really close hills. Now if you select all 3 of these objects, you'll notice that they're of type Sprite, 2D and UI. In this case, you want to actually change them to a texture, and make sure you apply the import settings. So why did we change them to a texture? Well, you can bring them on as sprites, but there's a much more elegant way to do it. This alternative does come with a few caveats though. It's because the way that we're going to do it is combining some 3D objects with 2D objects. That's not a bad thing, you can definitely do it, but there are a few things you need to note. Now that we've changed these images to type texture, let's make some materials. So come to your materials folder, right click, create material. We'll call this one BG01. Under shader, we'll change it to mobile, particles, alpha blended. Now I'm just going to jump back up to my backgrounds folder, grab the background 01 texture and drag it into this box over here. So now we've created a material for this texture. Okay, let's just do that 2 more times. So create material, BG02, mobile, particles, alpha blended, backgrounds folder, BG02, perfect. Once again into the materials folder, create material, BG03, mobile, particles, and alpha blended. Back to the backgrounds folder and drag in the 3rd one. Okay, so now we've created our 3 materials. Now what are we going to attach these materials to? This is where that 3D object I was talking about comes into play. So if we come up to Game Object, 3D Object, Quad. Now the quad's really small on the scene, so I'm just going to make it a bit bigger. I'm going to go with 18 by 12. You can see that this is a fair bit bigger than the scene, but it's perfectly okay because this camera boundary will change shape depending upon the current screen resolution you set your game into. So by making it overlap a little bit, you're making sure that you're not going to pick up any extra areas of the screen. Okay, now I'm just going to call my quad layer 01. You'll notice down here we have a mesh collider and a mesh renderer. The renderer is fine, but we don't actually need a collider because we're not doing any 3D collisions with this quad. So I can right click, remove component on the collider. As for the mesh renderer, you can see down here in materials, we have an array of size 1 and that's fine, but at element 0, if you click this dot over here, from the menu you can now click BG01. Now notice what happened? Our quad is actually in front of our scene. You can fix this by coming up to the Z position and let's say 200. That should put it far in the background. Okay, now let's play the game and see how that looks. Now notice as I move to the edge, I can actually walk off the side of the background, and the background pretty much stays static to the location of the environment, and that's not exactly what we want straight up. However, if we drag this layer 1 up onto our follow camera, it then becomes a child node of the camera and will respond to the movement of the camera by moving these child layers as well. So if I hit play again, you'll notice that as I move, the background layer stays in the one spot. So that's a lot closer to what I'm looking for, but of course there's no parallax effect or anything else yet, and we only have one layer done. So let's have a look at bringing some more of those layers in. I don't have to start from scratch. I can right click on layer 1, duplicate, and again, duplicate. And don't forget to change the name, so we'll have layer 2 and layer 3. You also need to fix up the order of these layers, so layer 1 is at 210, so I'll put layer 2 at 200 and layer 3 at 190. And then you also just need to change the materials as well. So for layer 2, we come down to the material picker, it will be BG02. For layer 3, it will be BG03. Okay, you can see some stretching here. So if I grab our layer 3, come up to the scaling tool, I can then grab that and scale it down to around what the right size would be. Then use the move tool to move it back to the bottom of the screen. Make sure you do the same for layer 2. Scale tool. And then the move tool. And by the looks of it, I can also move my background layer up just a little bit. Okay, that's looking pretty good for the background. Now notice we haven't made prefabs for any of these and they're showing up black in the hierarchy. We don't actually need to have prefabs for each separate layer since we're making a child of the follow camera. Instead, we can apply the prefab to the follow camera, and each of those layers will be applied to the prefab as well. Okay, so that's each of our layers added. Next, we need to look at implementing the parallax effect, so that each of these layers will move as the camera moves. And notice I'm saying camera, not player. That's because when you're up against the side of a level, it doesn't make sense if the camera stops moving and the background keeps moving. It's all about the points of perspective. And the points of the perspective of the player are not the character, they're actually the camera. So let's have a look at how we can do this now.